episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest who is helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. And in this discussion, we're going to get into some topics that we have not yet touched on previous episodes, but are extremely timely, including some discussions on the area of both supply chain and logistics in the healthcare environment. As a little background, today we're going to be headed up virtually to the New Hampshire area to KMC Systems, which is a medical contract manufacturing and engineering firm which develops, designs, and manufactures groundbreaking medical instrumentation for a variety of medical and life science companies that work in the domains of in vitro diagnostics, therapeutics, high-volume laboratory instruments, point-of-care devices, just to name a few things. And we have the honor of being joined by Derek Kane, who is Vice President and General Manager at KMC Systems, where he serves overseeing a variety of key areas in the company, including engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, and quality assurance. In his current role, he also oversees the day-to-day operations of the company, as well as the development and implementation of the strategic business plan for its growth. Mr. Kane has more than 20 years of experience contract manufacturing and in various leadership roles in high-growth environments. He has a well-established track record of bringing innovative medical devices to market and into high-volume production around the world. Prior to KMC Systems, Mr. Kane was Executive Vice President and Divisional General Manager for Inventus Power, where he's responsible for the company's American operations and medical and military global business. And prior to that, had been a Global Business Unit Director at Jabil, which was responsible for global healthcare business, including manufacturing, design, and development of Class 1, 2, and 3 medical devices. Mr. Kane has an Executive MBA from Kellogg School of Business, Northwestern University, a Bachelor of Science and Engineering from the University of West Scotland, and as just one more point of interest, KMC Systems is a unit of Elbit Systems of America, which is itself a wholly owned subsidiary of Elbit Systems, a leading Israeli company focused on innovative technology-based systems for diverse defense and commercial applications. Derek Kane, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Ira. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Me too. And Derek, we typically start things off just by giving our guests the floor for a couple minutes. Obviously, I read a little bit about your background. Could you just take a few minutes to further introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, where you grew up, how you got involved in sort of electronics and power and engineering, and a little bit of your path now into healthcare? I think that would be a great way to start everything off.
Sure. So I mean, I think you did a pretty good job of summarizing my career during the intro session. So, I mean, I've been in contract manufacturing for over 20 years. The accent you hear, it's not a New England accent. I'm originally from the west coast of Scotland, but I kind of class myself as a global citizen. So I started my career at Jabil in the sort of the late 1990s, early 2000s, really as contract manufacturing was taking off, and that really propelled my career. I did a lot of different roles in plant operations, plant engineering. Jabil did a significant amount of M&A. I was at the front of that when we did a lot of M&A. Moved to Asia, did a 5-year overseas assignment in Shanghai, running supply chain for Jabil in Asia. So really good span of global understanding of supply chain and supply chain issues on a global basis and total cost of ownership. Contract manufacturing obviously evolved a lot over the years since its initial conception of supporting the telecoms industry. I think when the telecoms industry kind of had its bubble bursting in the early 2000s, a lot of contract manufacturing started to pivot into other markets, healthcare being one of them. Mm-hmm. That's a trend we continue to see. So I moved into, I'll say, general management of healthcare business, 2008, 2009. Really on a bigger scale. I was running supply chain for Jabil in that space, but 2008, 2009, really get into running healthcare businesses, launched a ton of different product platforms for our OEM partners, whether it's pulse oximetry products, whether it's anesthesia monitoring products for monitoring brainwave activity whilst you're under general anesthetic, infusion pumps, central feeding pumps, cryogenic surgical generators, hemodialysis machines, The list goes on. So the beauty about, I guess, being in contract manufacturing is you get to touch a lot of different types of therapies and technologies. Being involved in the development side, it's really bringing that science and technology together, which is really what we're leading the charge on heavily at KMC today. When you look at 2020, obviously a pandemic year and lots of challenges on the world economy, the world health. And at KMC, I'm fortunate to be leading a company that is really in an interesting market in the sense of diagnostics testing. I kind of view KMC as being experts in highly regulated lab automation, sample management, sample prep type equipment, which historically has not been something that's had the same level of focus in the, I'll say, the healthcare arena as minimally invasive therapies or robotic surgeries. It's kind of not been as topical. I think COVID has changed that, obviously, in terms of the need for testing, if need for access to testing and accuracy of testing and volume of testing. All those kind of buzzwords really touch on the key capabilities that we have here at KMC, and beyond just IVD, the downstream needs that has on the pharmaceutical space to bring drugs to the market quicker, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty rounded career covering lots of different aspects of the business and from a healthcare contract manufacturing point of view. And we're trying to break that mold at KMC, where we do a lot more than just your typical contract manufacturer, because we bring a lot of front-end research of taking these scientific principles of modern testing that is developed in a lab and really bringing that to life in technology. So a little bit different. We've got over 100 patents that we've got our name on in conjunction with our customer partners. So we're pretty special. So it's a lot of really smart people here working on innovative solutions.
It's really interesting as you talk through that, and having spent my time in pharma and biotech and sort of seeing the transition in terms of outsourcing things to organizations like KMC. I'm always fascinated in the sense that of the companies you never hear about, but are like KMC, but are doing these amazing things behind the scenes. And sort of, I saw, you guys mentioned in one article a sort of unheard of first responders working on COVID and other things, which is always fascinating. Could you talk a little bit? I mean, I know that, you have the two divisions. You have sort of the medical engineering, and you meet with different customers and you come up with solutions for them. And you also have the contract manufacturing. And then, I mean, obviously nothing confidential here. A couple months ago, I think I saw an article about a collaboration with the U.S. Navy on new ventilator systems that they asked you to help out on in engineering. If you could just talk a little bit about some of that. Obviously nothing confidential, but the types of customers you deal with and the types of solutions you typically work on for them.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the top 5, the top 10, either med tech companies or life sciences companies in the world, the kind of the who's of the Fortune 200 of healthcare life sciences, we have either active relationships with those types of companies today, or we've had active relationships over a 40-year history. So we're kind of been around for 40 years, or we have been around for 40 years. And our engagement model, it's like an a la carte menu, where it's not uncommon for a customer to come to us and say, we have this problem, we have this need, and it can be a post-it note idea or a whiteboard mind map of a problem statement that they're trying to solve from a science point of view, a science research point of view, where there's a new trend, there's a new need to drive higher accuracy of testing or throughput of testing based on a population trend, whatever that may be. And they're trying to figure out how to do that from either a microfluidics handling point of view, to manage a small sample set of patient sample to run more tests on, to drive higher accuracy data, or to try and optimize the throughput of a lab to test for higher volume of people, or to drive accuracy, et cetera, et cetera. And they come with those sort of problem statements. And we build out complete solutions of taking that problem statement, looking at the customer's chemistry and designing that chemistry, that lab operation that's done by a lab technician where they're manually pipetting a sample and they're putting it on a petri dish, and they're doing what they would do in a true scientific fashion. And we bring that to technology of automating that in a platform, a piece of hardware. It can be a desktop platform, or it can be a large system that processes 1,000 to 1,500 samples a day in a highly regulated and controlled fashion. So the instruments that we produce, depending on what they're testing for, whether it's something as something like COVID or something like cervical cancer or leukemia, these can range from class 1 through to class 3 instruments that are regulated by the FDA. So we take that research and really build on that research and do product development, product realization, and all the regulatory filing that goes with that, to the point where we put the customer's name at the top of the sort of 510K submission and support that submission. So that's kind of the full caveat of what we're capable of doing from a development point of view, and all the around optics, sample handling, microfluidics, etc., sample handling, patient records. Because obviously, if you're running an instrument that's got, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000, 3,000 samples in at a point in time stacked up being measured, the ability to control and make sure that the sample that is being tested at that time ties to the correct patient records. So there's a lot of software algorithms there, a lot of machine-based learning. So it's really that beachhead of science coming together with technology and all those kind of buzzwords of machine-based learning, artificial intelligence. A lot of our machines are self-calibrating, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the engineering me, when I look at what we design and develop, gets excited and gets geeked out. We've got about 10% of our engineering pool are PhDs. We're actively growing that. We're on a recruitment drive just now. We're going to add another 30% to our engineering pool this year, 2021, to support some new development projects. So that's kind of the development side. Now, you develop a lot of tribal knowledge, product knowledge, when you're developing those types of products, and you're doing the alpha, the beta prototype units as part of the 510K submission. We generally, I would say 95% of the time, take those products if they reach commercialization and the customer wants to continue with commercialization. And migrate that then into what you would typically see as a contract manufacturer. Building, assembling, testing the products, shipping those products to the field, and providing some follow-on, I'll say, aftermarket services. So we've got all of that under one house. So our R&D team, our product development team are all, okay, COVID's put a spanner in the works around remote working and what have you, but we've adapted very well to that. But it's all under one roof. So our research and development team are on the second floor of the facility. The ground floor is our production layout. So we've shown, just through that model, when you talk about and you look at some of the macro trends that are going on in healthcare and some of the pressures on time to market, some of the reasons or the drivers behind the outsourcing of certain activities within healthcare around driving improved time to market, our model time and time again shows that helps that time to market, that total cost of ownership of us being the design, the development, and the research partner for some of these new innovative scientific needs, and then translate that into a time to market of access to instruments, access to the therapy, access to the tests. 2020 was a great example of that. And one of our customers, obviously I can't disclose the customer, that customer partner had a significant need to increase instrument install capacity to support the volume testing needed on COVID. I mean, we went through almost a 300% ramp on that business in the sort of second half of last year, once they got emergency use authorization on their COVID test. So we ramped that instrument significantly, and the structure we had in KMC around having those engineers that were able to support some of those changes and some of those software upgrades that were needed to support the conversion of the instrument to test for COVID to then deploy that into the manufacturing line and ramp capacity. And then how we structure our supply chain. We've made a conscious effort because of the types of product we produce, because of the industry we're in, and the volume of product we put through our business. We've made a conscious effort on the whole to onshore our supply chain. Now, there's certain commodity items that, yes, we buy those as commodities from, I'll say, the emerging markets, the BRIC type countries, mainly China. But that's in the minority of where our sourcing is. We deployed a deliberate onshoring strategy, and really you put a pin in the map of KMC's location here in Merrimack, New Hampshire. You kind of draw a radius out, maybe 150 to 200 miles. Probably 80% of our supply base are within that radius. So it's kind of what I call a campus supply model that gives us that flexibility to drive upside in demand when needed. It gives us that flexibility to work that time to market discussion as you're trying to innovate these highly complex instruments, because I mean, we're basically automating what lab technicians would do into high volume throughput. So a lot of robotics, there's a lot of movement of parts, and it's highly engineered solutions that drive a lot of collaboration with our engineers, our supply chain partners, from a human factors and a use case point of view, really understanding our customer base. I mean, we've brought novel technologies around some early development opportunities with customers around using artificial intelligence. So the video gaming headsets that you use around playing a video game and having the headset on, we use that as a concept. We've developed a concept that we use for customers around creating a lab environment where the customer can put the headset on. They can tell us a spec of the lab that this instrument may be placed in, and we show them different concepts from a use case of where the instrument would be, where the sample prep station would be, and they can walk around and get a feel for the instrument. We use technology like that to really start the human factors piece. That was kind of something we've been working on, but the COVID, the social distancing, the ability to get in and do these sort of things really elevated that. So it's really exciting for me when I see all this kind of technology coming together and working. And last year was kind of a monumental year for us and really showing that the model worked. And we put in a lot of install of instruments in supporting of our customers to not just for COVID, we were also doing launches of new products that were getting placed in Europe to support for cervical cancer testing. I mean, in countries like Germany and Holland, the instruments we designed and supported for one customer, once those instruments hit their full capacity, they'll be testing about 50% of the female population for cervical cancer with a high degree of accuracy. There's some predictive analytics on the number of lives that will be saved through early diagnosis of that. So there's just lots of different touch points as we bring together our research development, and then how that rolls through to production, how it rolls through to our supply chain partners. It's kind of a special model, and I think that's why when I look at our customer base, we truly have the kind of the who's who of life science customers.
And you know, as you talk about supply chain resiliency, disaster recovery, I obviously mentioned the location of KMC and being near sort of a lot of your majority of your suppliers, and then also using your network or your internal network of engineers and other specialists to go out to your suppliers and figure out how to optimize things. Any other important learnings in the post-pandemic world, looking forward now that you guys are also thinking about, you know, God forbid, disaster number 2 comes along, other interesting things regard to sort of this just resiliency in general throughout the healthcare system?
I mean, I think the designing in flexibility into your supply chain, designing in flexibility to your business model. So we had the obvious step to the bar ask from a number of customers, where we were asked to step to the bar and help provide access, help provide more capacity on instruments to support the test for COVID. On the flip side of that, we also had a number of customers who weren't necessarily testing for COVID. Their instruments were testing for other types of ailments, illnesses, allergies, whatever it may be, who were basically deprioritized in terms of access to clinical labs to do instruments. It's almost like elective surgeries. There was 2020. There was kind of the tailwind of healthcare, which was around diagnostics testing and ventilators and getting access to that. Then there was the other side of healthcare where, okay, we're not necessarily in elective surgeries, but there was other types of some of the diagnostics testing that we were doing where our customer base couldn't install instruments because they weren't getting access to the clinical labs because the labs were being prioritized for doing COVID. Their instruments weren't tested for COVID. So we had kind of that mixed phenomenon going on of certain part of our business ramping aggressively to support this case, and other parts of our business a different side of flexibility. So for me, the relationships that we have with our supply chain partners and having those types of flexibility models designed in, having transparency on those flexibility models is obviously key. And in working through that, we identified a lot of things within our models that worked really well, or we identified some things in our models where we need to fine tune it in terms of just these surges and desurges in demand. I think the onshoring strategy was probably our biggest success story. I mean, when COVID truly hit, I mean, there was waves of COVID as it went around the globe. We had a period of time, early 2020, when China was I want to kind of say on lockdown, where some of those commodity items were hard to get. Now, we were fortunate that we designed in flexibility agreements into our supply chain model where we were holding certain stock levels of those components that tided us through, but it was tight. So we constantly review those flexibility models with customers. We look at sell-through analysis, we look at instrument installs, and we try and use predictive analytics to predict, okay, what's the demand going to be, et cetera, to then really drive those models. I mean, I think the one thing that really pleased me when I look back at 2020 in terms of our supply chain resiliency is the number of our suppliers that wanted to step to the bar and do the right thing, like we were doing the right thing for our customer partners. We had a supplier in California that was supplying some very specialized motors that help with the automation and the movement of samples through the instruments. They were ramping production to support increased output at the same time that the California fires were burning. So their factory, the route from their factory to the airport was the forest fires. And it was one of the senior leaders of that supplier that got in the car with these motors and drove through the night a different route to make sure motors got on a plane. So just the resiliency of our supply base, wanting to step to the bar and do the right thing, partly obviously because of the emotional thing that goes with COVID and the pressure that we're seeing in the world, but also because they believe in our business, they believe in us. We've been around for 40 years. We've got suppliers that have been with us for that length of time, and we deploy our business on a partnership type basis. So the engineers that you talk about, we have suppliers in, not necessarily the post-it note idea when we're doing conceptual layouts with our customers, but once we've got the basic system requirement defined, we drive an early supplier involvement model. So when it comes to doing initial breadboard samples or initial product concept development, our suppliers are part of that process. They're part of not just design for manufacturability, but design for supply chain, design for total cost of ownership, design for life cycle analysis, because our instruments, once we design our instruments and lock it in, it needs to be stable for 15 plus years. We can't go back to the FDA every 6 to 9 months on behalf of our customers asking for a resubmission because component X went end of life. So there's really a lot of front end planning that goes on. For me, getting to know the customer demand cycle and planning, and that's that flexibility, is something we're constantly evolving. And I think it's going to be something that's going to be challenging going forward, because I think historically the investment and the infrastructure that clinics and hospitals were putting in diagnostics testing is different from where it's going to be in the future. So I think there was obviously big focus for some of these big hospital chains or clinics to put investments into the latest technology, whether it's surgical robotics to improve bedtime turnaround, etc., because it's minimally invasive. And diagnostic testing wasn't necessarily seen as, I'll say, a critical healthcare investment. It was needed, but wasn't necessarily seen as critical. I think what we saw from an economic point of view on COVID, I would certainly say that's going to challenge that, because I think there's a realization if we don't have access to testing, then how do you screen people? How do you identify which parts of the population are safe, etc.? So I think understanding that flexibility and how we scale going forward is going to be an interesting challenge.
Derek, as we talked about earlier, pharma has changed a lot over the decades. Back in whatever the 1960s and 70s, they would do everything. They started outsourcing manufacturing and then Salesforce, and then they outsource a lot of basic R&D to the small biotechs now. But the public now is, especially after this pandemic, is looking at pharma very differently. It's not just about, I don't just want my cholesterol lowering pills. I'm expecting bigger things from pharma, whether that's, I want new vaccines very fast, and a whole slew of new. I want my clinical trial not canceled, and so forth. Talk a little bit about some of your ideas and some of what's going to be happening in the coming years as sort of pharma has to remodel itself as well in this new era.
Yeah. So pharma is for sure a sector that we see as being highly attractive to KMC, and I'll define highly attractive as being something that I think we can help them on their journey. I think one of the things that I think is wonderful to see is how some of the big pharma companies, whether it's Moderna or whether it's Pfizer, whether it's J&J, how they really stepped to the bar through 2020 and truly did the right thing in terms of getting these vaccines developed in groundbreaking, record-breaking time, and they're providing mass scale to that. And I think the challenge now is, well, the bar's been set of, well, it can be done, so can it now be done on a consistent basis? And I think the challenge behind that is the drug discovery, the drug development cycle. How do you speed up that cycle of something which is very much a scientific research type pieces, as a new virus, a new disease is discovered, or they're trying to develop a vaccine or a series of drugs to treat a particular ailment that's been hereditary in mankind for a long period. How do you speed that up? And if I look at what KMC brings to the table in terms of microfluidics and sample handling, sample prep, all the things we use within our IVD instruments or some of our NGS platforms, etc., it's highly aligned to that. So I think that's what I see. There's the obvious benefit of potentially reducing the time to market and keeping, whether the new norm is going to be 9 months or 2 years versus the typical 5+ years to develop a drug. I think that still needs to be figured out. Not just with the pharma companies, but also with the FDA in terms of the regulatory approvals and the clinical data sets, et cetera. But I think ultimately something's going to change there. And I think obviously with the change in administration, I would imagine there's going to be focus from a government point of view of time to market, given the economic impact that COVID had. So I think there's going to be a lot more focus on this to reduce the time to market. I think we as a company are ideally positioned from a lab automation, a highly regulated lab automation point of view to do that. And if it's achievable, which I think it is, with the coming together of all those entities I spoke about, ultimately you've got to think that there's got to be a cost benefit to the consumer. I mean, a large percentage of drug costs in the early stages of drugs is really the drug companies trying to recover their development costs. So logic would say if you can reduce the time to market on development of a drug, you reduce the the cost entry point because you're not trying to recover that cost. So it's an area that we're pushing hard into. We've done some work on certain technologies around that, and hyperpolarization of contrast imaging for diagnostics imaging equipment, which is in the pharma space. So we're really looking to see how, okay, it's never really been something that has been seen as a huge need in the market, but I think it's like post 9/11, new markets opened and new business cases open. Post COVID, I think the same thing's going to happen. So we're building out case studies. We're talking to a number of these companies around how we can help, and how we can help them engineer their problems. We've got a good track record. We've got a good track record of doing it in other spaces, but I think the pharma industry, it's going to be interesting to see how it matures over the next few years in terms of a time to access, and it, without giving up on quality, without giving up on clinical data. And I think that's where that lab automation, that ability to speed some of this stuff up, is where we're uniquely positioned.
Really interesting. Doug, one last thing, and I think, well, for the U.S. audience, but also abroad, you are located in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I actually did a show a couple of months ago with the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute, which is up the river there in Manchester. Is New Hampshire, obviously we think of Silicon Valley. I mean, I sit here sort of near New Jersey and the pharmaceutical, the East Coast pharmaceutical industry. Just talk comments about the sort of the bio ecosystem up there in New Hampshire. Is this becoming sort of a new hotbed for the industry?
I would expand the geography beyond New Hampshire. I mean, okay, we've been in this facility for 40 years. It's part of our heritage. It's part of our DNA per se for being here. I would expand it and look at it in New England or Greater Boston.
Okay.
We're a 45-minute commute. It's a sort of reverse commute to Cambridge, where there's a huge biotech, medtech space. I was doing some research the other day. There's about 500 companies within the Greater Boston area that are in either the pharma space or the medtech space, and just in different ranges of companies, from the super large guys to really disruptive, innovative startup companies. And we're touching a bit of all that. So we've got a pretty long tenured workforce. I mean, one of the things I'm really proud when I come in the door at KMC is I look at the diversity and the inclusive type workforce we've got. I've got people in the company that have been here 40 years, right? KMC was founded in 1980. I've got some people in my supply chain team that have been here since day one. I just did an intake of a couple of new hires, I would say a couple of weeks ago, who there's one lady that just joined the company straight out of college, first job in our purchasing department. We're driving an active STEM program. We've hired a number of PhDs. So for me, it's a great catchment area for two sides. It's a great catchment area for talent, just with MIT and Worcester Polytechnic and Dartmouth Hitchcock. And so there's a great talent base here that really, you look at what we do, we're highly innovative. So there's a great talent base there from our workforce, but there's also a great catchment area of customers that need our kind of services. Geographical point of view, we work with clients and customers on the West Coast in California. We are working with a lot of clients in Europe. Between both of those kind of client base, you're a 5 or 6 hour time zone. So we cover, it's kind of a nice spot for us. I mean, we have plans to grow. I think you mentioned at the start, we're a standalone subsidiary of Elbit Systems. Elbit Systems has other locations around the US, around the world. So as we grow over the next 4 or 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if KMC had other pinpoints in the geography map. But I like the New England geography, from the talent catchment, the potential customer base, and what have you. And it really is an innovative hotbed when you look at the number of startups. I mean, we just recently supported a customer in getting emergency use authorization on a blood management platform, startup, venture capital funded, really, really neat technology that will eventually, once that goes through its clinical trials, will help with a chronic cardiac illness in infants. Can't really say a lot more about it, but it's just being where we are enables us to get involved in these things, and it's a good spot, and it's super exciting. And the cool thing is that talent I talk about, that STEM, that diversity inclusion. When I ask the people that have been here for 40 years, what makes you stay here, and it's, well, we work on really cool things. It's not like a contract manufacturer that's just churning out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of cell phones. We work on really cool things that make a difference in people's life. We did a study of the instruments that we've installed in terms of test capacity that we brought. We touch almost 1 billion people's lives a year just based on the number of instruments we've built. And if you looked at those instruments running at the optimized completion rate, I mean, there's 1 billion people out there over the last 12 to 18 months that have been tested on a KMC instrument, ranging from COVID through to cervical cancer, leukemia, just to a number of different illnesses and diseases. I mean, that's pretty cool.
It's very exciting, and it's, I said at the beginning, I love these. I don't call you a sleeping giant, but it's, the behind the scenes shops that are doing really amazing stuff. And, you don't need to be in the public eye. You keep it quiet, you do these things, and it's really great, Derek. Wishing you and the firm, obviously the best with all that you're doing moving forward. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Derek Kane, Vice President and General Manager of KMC Systems, developing and designing and manufacturing all sorts of groundbreaking medical instrumentation for therapeutics, for point-of-care devices, in vitro diagnostics, and doing some really amazing things on the supply chain, logistics, and disaster recovery front, especially in this post-pandemic world. Derek, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to educate us on everything you're up to and your future plans, and thank you for doing it. And as we say, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow on all fronts. It's been a really great time and honor talking to you.
My pleasure, Ira. Thank you.